Rain falls on your roof. It runs down your gutter, into a pipe, into a drain, and it's gone. In parts of the American West, until surprisingly recently, putting a barrel under that downspout was against the law. Not a zoning issue, not an HOA rule. State water law. The same body of law that governs reservoirs, irrigation districts, and municipal supply. In Colorado, residential rainwater collection was effectively prohibited for most households until 2016. In Utah, it was illegal until 2010. And the reason was not that anybody wanted to sell you water. The reason is that in those states, the rain falling on your roof was already legally owned by somebody else, in some cases by somebody who had claimed it in the 1870s, several hundred miles downstream, who has been dead for a century. That sounds like a conspiracy. It isn't one. The real explanation is stranger. It runs through gold mining camps, a legal doctrine older than indoor plumbing, and one government study that found something genuinely counterintuitive about where rain actually goes. So who owns the rain? And how much water are you pouring down a drain every single year? In 2012, a man in Oregon went to jail over collected water, and the story went around the world. His name was Gary Harrington. He owned land in Jackson County, and the headlines wrote themselves. Man jailed for collecting rainwater on his own property. It ran everywhere. It is still circulating. If you have heard one story about rainwater being illegal, it is almost certainly this one. I'm going to give you the accurate version because the accurate version is more interesting. And because if I give you the headline version and you go and look it up, you will rightly stop trusting everything else I say in this video. Harrington did not go to jail over rain barrels. He had built 3 reservoirs on his land, held back by dams, holding on the order of 13 million gallons of water between them. Not barrels, ponds, with dams, and a boat dock. The state's position was that these were fed by channels and diversions from waterways crossing his property, that this was surface water already allocated under Oregon law, and that he had been told over roughly 2 decades that he needed permits. He had held permits that were later revoked. He continued anyway. He was convicted on several counts of illegally diverting and storing water and served 30 days. His own argument was that it was simply rain and snowmelt falling on his own land. The state said it was water from streams he had no right to take. Whatever you make of that, it was not a case about a rain barrel. Oregon did not prohibit rooftop rainwater collection then and does not now. So why does the myth matter here? Because it grew out of something true. There genuinely were states where a household rain barrel was illegal, and the Harrington story traveled as fast as it did precisely. Because a great many people already half knew that. The specific case was wrong. The underlying situation was completely real. The real story is Colorado, and it is less dramatic and far more consequential. For well over a century, Colorado had the most restrictive water law in the country. The state's position was simple. Precipitation is part of the surface water system. That system is fully allocated to existing rights holders, and capturing water before it can run off is an unauthorized diversion. That applied to essentially every household in the state. Nobody was going door to door. There was no rain barrel enforcement squad. But the law was the law, and the state engineer's office would tell you plainly, if you asked, that you were not permitted to do it. Utah was similar. Collection was prohibited outright until 2010 legislation created a registration framework. And in Colorado, changing it took nearly a decade and 2 separate rounds of legislation. The first came in 2009, and it was narrow. One bill permitted limited rooftop collection, but only for rural properties, holding certain kinds of exempt well permits. A small minority of households. A second authorized a handful of pilot developments so the state could study rainwater harvesting at scale and measure what actually happened downstream. The general permission did not arrive until 2016. The bill that finally passed allowed any Colorado household to collect rooftop rainwater in up to 2 barrels, with a combined capacity of no more than 110 gallons for outdoor use only on the property where it fell. 2 barrels, 110 gallons. That is the hard-won right that took 7 years of legislative argument. To anyone watching this in Britain or Australia, where rainwater harvesting is not merely legal but subsidized, and in some places required for new construction, this is completely baffling. To understand it, you have to go back to the gold rush. Before the law established the stake. How much water are we actually talking about? The arithmetic is simple, and almost nobody has done it. 1 inch of rain falling on 1 square foot of roof is about 0.62 gallons. Take a modest house with a roof footprint of 1,000 square feet. 1 inch of rain on that roof is roughly 620 gallons. Not over a season. From 1 inch of rain. Real systems don't capture all of it. Some evaporates. Some goes to the first flush. Some overshoots the gutter in a downpour. A realistic capture efficiency is around 75 to 85%. Call it 500 gallons from an inch of rain on a small house. Now scale it up. A location receiving 30 inches a year on that same 1,000 square foot roof sheds something in the region of 15,000 gallons annually. Add a garage and a shed, and it climbs considerably. Even in genuinely arid country, 12 inches a year, 1,000 square feet still sheds several thousand gallons. That is not a trickle. That is a substantial fraction of what a household garden uses in a season. It arrives free, it arrives soft, with no chlorine in it, and it is delivered to a point roughly 4 feet above the ground you want to put it on, which means gravity will move it for you. In most of the country, it goes into a storm drain, mixes with road runoff, and leaves. Picture the version where it doesn't. A tank at the corner of the house, a garden that keeps running when the hosepipe restrictions come in. Water that costs nothing and arrives regardless of what the reservoir level is doing. That's the prize. Which makes it all the more remarkable that, across a large part of the American West, reaching for it was against the law for a century and a half. American water law splits down the middle of the continent, and the split falls roughly where the rainfall runs out. In the eastern states, water law is broadly riparian. It descends from English common law, and it developed in a wet country. The principle is that if a watercourse runs through or alongside your land, you have a right to reasonable use of it, shared with everyone else along its length. Nobody owns the water outright. In a wet climate, this works because there is generally enough to go around. West of roughly the 100th meridian, that system collapses because there isn't enough. What developed instead came out of the mining camps. Miners in California and Colorado in the 1850s needed water, usually a long way from where the water was, and they needed legal certainty before they would invest in building ditches and flumes across miles of country. The convention that emerged mirrored how they were already handling mineral claims. First in time, first in right. Whoever puts water to beneficial use first holds the senior right. The next claimant holds the next right, and so on down the line. In a shortage, the senior right is satisfied in full before the junior right receives anything at all. It doesn't matter whether your land touches the river, you can divert it 50 miles away. And it operates on use it or lose it. A right left unexercised can be forfeited. This is prior appropriation, and it built the American West. Every irrigated field, every mine, every city out there rests on it. It also produced a situation that's hard to intuit. In these states, essentially every drop in the system is already claimed, and many of the senior claims date to the 19th century. There are river systems where the paper rights add up to more water than the river has ever actually carried. Now apply that framework to a rain barrel. Under strict prior appropriation logic, precipitation is not unowned water waiting to be taken. It is an input to a fully allocated system. Water that lands on your roof runs off, soaks in, and eventually contributes to the flow that a senior rights holder downstream is legally entitled to receive. Intercepting it before it can do that is, in legal terms, a diversion. No different in kind from putting a pipe into a creek, only smaller. That is the genuine reasoning. It is not a plot. It is a 19th century allocation system designed for mining ditches, applied with total internal consistency to a plastic barrel under a gutter. And here is the wrinkle that eventually broke it open. When Colorado finally commissioned proper hydrological study of the question, the answer turned out to be far more interesting than the law had assumed. In a typical semi-arid developed watershed, the overwhelming majority of precipitation never reaches a stream at all. Figures around 97% are widely cited from that work. It evaporates. It's transpired by plants. It soaks in and stays there. Only a small remainder ever becomes the runoff that feeds the water rights system, which meant household rain barrels were intercepting a fraction of a fraction. In watershed terms, the volume was close to noise. That study is the reason the law changed, not a lawsuit, not a protest movement. Somebody went and measured it, and the measurement showed the theoretical harm was, at household scale, effectively non-existent. It's worth understanding why this is worth any effort at all, because rainwater isn't just free. It is better than what comes out of the tap, for specific and measurable reasons. It has almost nothing dissolved in it. Municipal and well water carries dissolved minerals, mostly calcium and magnesium carbonates, which is what water hardness is. Every time you irrigate, you're adding those salts to your soil, and the water evaporates while the salts stay behind. In dry climates with hard water and without enough natural rainfall to flush the soil profile, this accumulates over years. Rainwater carries essentially none of it. It's naturally slightly acidic. Rain picks up carbon dioxide as it falls and sits a little below neutral pH. Tap water in hard water areas is frequently alkaline, and repeated irrigation pushes soil pH steadily upward. For blueberries, azaleas, rhododendrons, and camellias, plants that require acidic soil, this is the difference between a thriving plant and a yellowing, struggling one. Serious growers of those crops often use rainwater exclusively, and this is why. No chlorine or chloramine. Municipal water is disinfected, which is the entire point of it, and an unambiguously good thing for drinking water. It is less good for soil biology. Chlorine dissipates from standing water fairly quickly. Chloramine, which many utilities now use instead, is deliberately more persistent. It's the right temperature. Water from a tank has equilibrated to ambient air. Water from a tap in midsummer often comes out cold enough to check root growth, and it comes with elevation. A tank at the corner of a house sits above the beds. With a spigot and a hose, gravity does the distribution, which matters a great deal during a power cut or during exactly the restrictions that make you want it in the first place. None of that is dramatic. It's simply that the free water also happens to be the better water, and most households route it into a drain. So why was it illegal? And why did fixing it take so long? There is no villain in this story, and I'm not going to manufacture one. Nobody was protecting a water utility's revenue. The volumes involved were far too small to register on anyone's balance sheet. What actually happened is duller and considerably more instructive. A legal doctrine constructed in the 1850s for mining ditches was applied with perfect logical consistency to a situation nobody in the 1850s could have imagined. The reasoning was internally sound throughout. It simply rested on an empirical assumption that intercepted precipitation would otherwise have reached the stream, that nobody had ever bothered to measure at household scale. And once a rule exists inside a system as consequential as Western water rights, changing it becomes genuinely difficult, for reasons that aren't stupid at all. Water rights in those states are property. They are bought, sold, inherited, and borrowed against. Entire farms and towns are built on their seniority. Any proposed change gets examined by every downstream holder, who suspects it might be the first step toward eroding something they own. So the barrel exemption had to be studied, piloted, quantified, and argued through a legislature by people who could demonstrate the effect was negligible, which is why Colorado's process ran from 2009 to 2016 and arrived at 110 gallons. Slow, cautious, evidence-driven, and, from the outside, completely absurd. There's a lesson in that which goes well beyond water. The most durable restrictions are usually not the ones somebody imposed deliberately. They're the ones that made complete sense under conditions that stopped existing, and then kept running on their own, because the cost of examining them fell on nobody in particular, and the cost of changing them fell on somebody specific. Here is how to build something that actually works, and the mistakes that ruin most first attempts. Check your own state and county first. Today, not from this video, these laws have changed repeatedly and will change again. Colorado permits 2 barrels and 110 gallons. Utah requires registration above a threshold. Several states actively encourage collection through tax exemptions or rebates. Many have passed laws preventing HOAs from banning barrels outright. Look up your state water authority and your local building department, because their rules are the only ones that apply to you. Size it from your roof, not from a guess. Roof footprint in square feet, times 0.62, times inches of rain, times about 0.8 for efficiency. Run the numbers for your wettest month and your driest. Most people wildly undersize. A single 55-gallon barrel fills and overflows in the first 10 minutes of a decent storm, which is exactly why so many people conclude the whole exercise is a gesture. At 55 gallons, it is a gesture. At several hundred, it stops being one. Screen every opening with fine mesh. This is not optional. Standing water is mosquito habitat, and across much of the country that's a public health matter rather than a nuisance. Mesh at the inlet, at the overflow, and at any gap around the lid. If larvae still appear, mosquito dunks containing BTI are a biological control specific to mosquito larvae and safe around other wildlife. Never leave open standing water. Fit a first flush diverter. The initial runoff carries accumulated bird droppings, dust, pollen, and grit off the roof surface. A diverter routes that first portion away before clean water starts filling the tank. A common guide is to divert roughly the first 10 gallons per 1,000 square feet of roof. It is the single largest improvement to water quality for the least money. Use opaque tanks. Light plus water plus nutrients equals algae. Dark, opaque containers prevent it. Plan the overflow deliberately. Your tank will fill, and then it will keep receiving water. Pipe the overflow somewhere useful, a garden bed, a swale, a soakaway, and well away from your foundations. An unplanned overflow beside a house wall is a genuinely expensive mistake. Build the base properly. A full 275-gallon tote weighs over a ton. It needs a level, solid, load-bearing base. And it needs a lid, latched, always. An open water container is a drowning hazard for a small child and a death trap for wildlife. Drain before it freezes. Water expands. A full tank left through a hard freeze will split, and so will everything plumb to it. 3 things I owe you before you go and build one. First, this water is not drinkable, and it is not for washing produce. Roof runoff picks up bird and rodent droppings, dust, and whatever your roof is made of. Asphalt shingles shed particles. Treated shingles shed the treatment. Older buildings may have lead flashing or lead-containing paint. Copper and zinc leach from flashing and gutters and accumulate in soil over time. Use it for irrigation. Apply it at the root zone with a hose or drip line rather than spraying it over the tops of leafy greens you intend to eat raw. wash your hands afterward. Making rainwater potable requires real filtration and disinfection and is an entirely separate project. Do not let anyone convince you that a screen and a first flush diverter make it safe to drink. Second, know what it can and cannot cover. A tank is a buffer, not a supply. It fills when it rains and empties when it doesn't, which makes it excellent at covering the 2 or 3 dry weeks between storms, and poor at covering a genuine 2-month drought, which is precisely when you most want it. In a Mediterranean climate with a 5-month dry season, the storage volume required to actually carry you through is very large and very expensive. Third, the failure case, which is by far the most common. Someone installs a single 55-gallon barrel in spring. The first real storm fills it in under 10 minutes, and then it overflows for the next 2 hours, dumping several hundred gallons directly against the house foundation. They water the garden twice and it's empty. They never screen the top, so by July it's breeding mosquitoes. By August, there's algae in it, and it's been knocked over once because it was standing on soft ground. They conclude that rainwater harvesting is a pointless hobby for people with too much time. And at that size, executed that way, they are entirely correct. The version that works is a few hundred gallons minimum, screened, diverted, on a solid base with the overflow piped somewhere deliberate. That's one weekend and a few $100s, and it will still be running in 15 years. Do it once, properly, rather than starting small and being disappointed. The strangest thing about this whole story is how ordinary the ending is. No court case broke it, no campaign, no movement, no scandal. Somebody in Colorado went out and measured where the rain actually goes, found that the overwhelming majority of it never reaches a stream at all, and a legislature adjusted a 150-year-old doctrine to fit the measurement. That's the entire mechanism. A rule from the gold rush, finally met with a number. Meanwhile, the rain is still falling on your roof this year, 15,000 gallons of it on an average house in an average climate. And in most places, it is still going straight into a drain. Check your state, then put something under the downspout.